Faithfully delivering value, interpreting great books worldwide. Hey there, this is Sally with Book Talk. Today, I'm diving into the book Poor Economics for you. For a lot of folks, their idea of poverty is just about not having enough food or clothes. The World Bank sets a benchmark for extreme poverty, living on less than $1.90 per day per person, which is about 12 won in RMB. This money isn't just for 3 meals a day. It also has to cover necessities, medical care, and children's education. You might find it hard to imagine. However, this group really exists, and the number is huge. As of 2020, there are approximately 730 million people living below the extreme poverty line globally, mostly in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. But, for decades, countries and charities worldwide have provided aid, like money, food, and medical care to them. Yet, these poor people still haven't escaped poverty. For example, in sub-Saharan Africa, which has the most poor, in 1990, the poverty rate was 55.1%, and by 2018, it was still 40.4%. Why hasn't aid helped much? So, should we continue to aid them? Why can't the poor escape poverty? The international community has been debating this endlessly. To tackle these issues, there are three economists, Abhijit Banerjee and Esther Duflo, a couple from MIT, and Michael Kremer from Harvard. Starting in 2003, they conducted over 240 experiments in poor areas across 40 countries. They found that the reason the poor struggle to escape poverty is that they often can't make good decisions about health, education, money, and other poverty-related issues. This is the root cause of why they stay poor. The three of them won the 2019 Nobel Prize in Economics for this, because their experimental approach to alleviating global poverty greatly enhanced our ability to fight it. The three of them won the 2019 Nobel Prize. The book's authors are Abhijit Banerjee and Esther Duflo, the couple who compiled their team's research into this book. The book has 10 chapters in total. Using extensive experimental data, the authors reveal how the poor make decisions in areas like health, economy, and education, and how to help them effectively. I'll help you understand this book through two questions. First, what is the essence of poverty? Second, how can we help the poor escape poverty? Let's look at the first question first. What is the essence of poverty? In other words, why are the poor poor? The authors describe the poor's situation as a poverty trap. What does that mean? Let's take an example. Suppose a person earns 20 yuan today. After deducting 18 yuan for essential food expenses, he has 2 yuan left. If he earns 22 yuan tomorrow, after deducting 18 yuan again, he can save 4 yuan. This way, as his income gradually increases, he can save more money, and slowly, he escapes poverty. But if someone can't earn 20 yuan the next day, only 17 yuan, then to cover the 18 yuan expense, he has to use 1 yuan from the 2 yuan he saved the day before. Over time, he'll only become more and more unable to make ends meet, getting poorer. The authors call this situation where tomorrow's income is always lower than today's, and they can't break the status quo to increase their income level, the poverty trap. But the authors found that the poor can't earn more money and can't escape the poverty trap. It's not because they're particularly lazy or unintelligent, but because their environment makes them lack necessary common sense, and their thinking and actions are constrained, making it hard to make good decisions. Here's a representative example. The authors found that many poor people make a living by running small businesses. Well, for instance, in Chennai, India, many vegetable vendors buy vegetables worth 1,000 rupees, which is about $20 daily, from wholesalers to sell. But they don't have the 1,000 rupees capital. The wholesaler lends it to them. By evening, the vegetables worth 1,000 rupees can be sold for 1,100 rupees. They then return the 1,000 rupees capital and 47 rupees interest to the wholesaler, keeping 53 rupees for themselves. Borrowing 1,000 rupees for a day requires repaying 1,447 rupees, a daily interest rate as high as 4.7%. Hearing this, someone might ask, with such high interest, why doesn't the government provide low-interest loans? The author's team investigated and found that formal institutions are unwilling to lend to the poor. Formal loans require collateral, which the poor almost never have, and the default rate among the poor is too high. Oh, no. To guard against default by the poor, institutions need to send people to investigate the poor's homes before lending. The more detailed the investigation, the higher the cost. So when the poor need money, they have to resort to high-interest loans. Such high loan interest? Why don't the vegetable vendors save 1,000 rupees to buy their own stock? Then they wouldn't have to pay 47 rupees interest, and their daily earnings would jump from 53 rupees to 100 rupees, double the income. Is saving 1,000 rupees really that hard? The authors found that on average, the vendors spend 5 rupees daily pocket money to buy themselves 2 cups of tea. And the authors followed the print. If they just skipped those 2 daily teas and saved that 5 rupees for stock, with compound interest in just 50 days, they could fully fund their own stock purchases. But these vendors can't do it. Those 2 daily teas are non-negotiable expenses for them. If saving 5 rupees daily is so hard, what if charities gave each vendor 1,000 rupees as startup capital? Wouldn't that solve their problem permanently? Actually, the research team did exactly that. They provided startup funds to some vendors to see if it would permanently increase their income, but the results disappointed. A year later, all funded vendors had returned to their original situation. They were back to daily borrowing at 4.7% interest. What happened in between? It wasn't that vendors became lazy or squandered the money. They diverted operational funds to other needs like family medical care or children's textbooks. From this case, we see why the poor stay poor. Certainly, there are objective reasons, harsh environments, insufficient startup capital, etc. But there are also subjective limitations in the poor's psychology and decision-making. Why is saving 2 cups of tea money so hard for Chennai vendors? On one hand, they don't believe 2 cups of tea money can change lives. Their challenges are too many, requiring more substantial funds, so they consider saving such small amounts futile. On the other hand, achieving this requires prolonged self-control, fighting desires daily for 50 tea-free days, which is too difficult, as the authors describe it. Self-control is like a muscle that tires with prolonged, repeated use. Moreover, when they received 1,000 rupees in aid, they didn't consider long-term gains, like using it as capital to earn more, but spent it solving immediate crises. So, long-term, they still can't escape poverty. This reveals the limitations in poor people's decision-making. This research holds great significance for governments and aid organizations, too. It clearly shows that direct donations might alleviate poverty short-term, but won't change long-term conditions. Pushing for low-interest bank loans also faces strong institutional resistance. Therefore, the research team developed a set of truly effective methods for the poor. First, understand the poor's situation and decisions through experiments, what they can and can't achieve. Second, analyze the psychology behind their behavior. Third, targeted assistance methodologies for the poor. So what specific assistance measures exist? That's what we'll cover in the second part. So, the authors categorize poverty trap factors into 4 groups: money, health, fertility or education, and uncontrollable risks. Let's examine each aspect sequentially. First factor, money. The poor are those who can't afford food is a major misconception. People assume the poor can't eat, lack energy to work, can't earn money. Thus, governments and international groups provide massive food aid to poor regions. For example, Egypt spent $3.08 on food subsidies during 2008 to 2009, 2% of its GDP that year. But surprisingly, much food ended up in rats' bellies. Data analysis shows even the extremely poor aren't starving. Surveys across 18 countries show food accounts for only 36% to 79% of spending among rural, extreme poor. Meaning absolute food scarcity doesn't exist. If not all money buys food, do they save the rest? Or buy nutritious food to strengthen their bodies for better work? The answer is the poor simply can't save money. When they have a little extra money, they choose tastier, more expensive food rather than buying more food or more nutritious options. For example, corn is usually the staple food for the poor. Theoretically, with extra money, they should buy more corn or eggs, nutritious food, but they spend money on things like sugar and tea.
Indulgent foods. In today's terms, they upgrade their consumption when they have money.
The researchers also observed that the poor feel some things are more important than food. For instance, weddings and funerals. The poor spend heavily on such events. In South Africa, an elderly person's funeral can cost about $825, roughly 40% of a family's annual income. After such a funeral, the family clearly has little savings left. More family members might go hungry, and children might be forced to drop out of school. Another example, televisions are also more important than food. The research team visited a remote Moroccan village where homes lack running water and have poor sanitation. Adults struggle to earn money for food, yet most families have TVs and DVD players, some even mobile phones. The poor not only fail to save money, but also don't strive to maximize earnings. The Indian vendor unwilling to save 5 rupees isn't an exception, it's typical among the poor. For example, using fertilizer on crops increases yields and profits. Data shows it can boost net income by 70%. But in Kenya, only 25% of farmers use fertilizer yearly, for reasons similar to the Indian vendors. When planting season arrives each year, most farmers have spent their money on other expenses, leaving nothing for fertilizer. So why do the poor behave this way? The reasons can be summarized in 3 points. First, poor lives are too monotonous. Buying junk food, TVs, or spending big on events is essentially about adding enjoyment and happiness. Second, saving requires immense self-control. Fighting desires daily, giving up tea and TV, sacrificing life's rare joys. For them, self-control is too tough. They really struggle to delay gratification. Third is the poor's lack of confidence. They don't hold hope for the future and feel stuck in poverty. So they just take it one day at a time, dealing with the present first. Based on this analysis, the authors came up with 3 suggestions. First, since the poor aren't short on food, stop giving food aid to everyone. Governments and international groups can shift gears to focus on nutrition for kids and pregnant women. That's how to really boost national health. Second, create a way for people to save money so the poor can stash cash early and use it later. For example, the research team started a plan to buy fertilizer ahead of time, selling it cheap to farmers right after harvest season, then delivering it when needed. This plan locked farmers' funds into fertilizer early on, and the number using fertilizer jumped by 50% right away. Third, the international community should give more to the poor. Microfinance options in Bangladesh. Famous economist Muhammad Yunus once set up a microfinance bank just for lending to the poor. The microfinance bank charges an average annual interest rate of about 25%. This rate is higher than regular bank loans, but way lower than what vendors usually pay. Microfinance banks work in 2 main ways. First, targeting female entrepreneurs because women are seen as more responsible and eager to repay. Second, loans are given to groups where members share responsibility for each other's debts. Groups meet weekly, members report on their businesses, and loan officers collect partial repayments at these meetings. This approach cleverly uses peer pressure to avoid defaults. Yunus won the 2006 Nobel Peace Prize for this. Now, after money issues, let's turn to the second big risk for the poor falling into The poverty trap. Health problems. Data-driven, serious data shows that in Indonesia, if a family member gets seriously ill, household spending drops by 20%. However, the authors found a common trend in poor areas. People spend big on treatment, but won't spend small amounts on prevention. Vaccination is a prime example of this. Many diseases can now be prevented by vaccines, like chickenpox and pneumonia. There's a very poor area in India called Udaipur. After extensive research there, the authors found child vaccination rates are only 6%, with 2 to 3 million dying yearly from vaccine-preventable diseases. What dysentery, common in poor areas, kills about 1.5 million children annually, mostly in South Asia and sub-Saharan Africa. The main cause is drinking contaminated water. Prevention is simple. Spend $0.18 on chlorinated disinfectant for wells to purify water for a month. Additionally, dehydration is a major immediate cause of death. Thus, oral rehydration solution, sugar-salt water mix, effectively prevents dehydration. Yet in Zambia, under 10% use disinfectant, and even fewer maintain monthly treatment despite buying it. UNICEF data shows only 1/3 of dysentery patients under 5 receive oral rehydration. So why are the poor unwilling to vaccinate or buy disinfectant? The reasons behind this are highly complex. First, local public hospitals provide poor service with frequent unexcused absences. A 2002-2003 World Bank survey across Bangladesh, Ecuador, India showed 35% average absence rate for medical staff. Villagers in mountainous areas travel hours to vaccination sites only to find staff absent, forcing them to return. Even when doctors attend, they often just prescribe after briefly asking symptoms, a key reason for patient distrust. Second, the poor lack sufficient knowledge. With minimal information access or health literacy, they struggle to understand vaccines' preventive role. They think vaccination is unnecessary while children appear healthy, and vaccines like measles shots only prevent specific diseases. Well, so many people can't understand why their children still get sick after vaccination. No, I don't. Therefore, these parents feel deceived and no longer trust vaccines. The same goes for dysentery. They don't believe a mixture of sugar and salt water can cure potentially fatal dysentery. They think the medicine that can cure diseases is antibiotics or IV drips. Therefore, when poor people get sick, they'd rather find private doctors who can prescribe antibiotics, or even after ineffective medical treatment, seek witch doctors for rituals, like the Boston Malink. The third reason brings us back to behavioral psychology. Should they vaccinate their children? It requires them to constantly exercise self-control and decision-making. For example, when promotional staff introduce vaccines, they have to judge if vaccines are useful and overcome immediate difficulties to take children for vaccination. Another example, adding disinfectant to wells every month is hard for ordinary people to stick to. Therefore, regarding health issues, the authors propose several suggestions. First, improve the management and service level of public hospitals so more poor people have places to seek medical care. Regulate the qualifications of private doctors. Control the sale of antibiotics to avoid poor people using antibiotics whenever they get sick, causing antibiotic resistance to spread. Caprice, unfair. Second, provide more medical convenience for the poor. For example, the research team stationed professional medical teams in villages to provide free vaccination services, and the vaccination rate rose from 6% to 17%. Furthermore, the government should give more default options to the poor so they don't have to make decisions themselves. In poor areas, the most effective method is to provide free disinfectant and place machines for adding it directly next to water sources. So, in densely populated areas, government public investment in water and sanitation facilities should also be initiated immediately. Additionally, distributing free medicine and nutritional supplements to children in schools is also a good method, and appropriate rewards can also be effective. For example, the research team had professional medical teams stationed in villages and provided rewards to those who came for vaccination. Each person received 2 kilograms of beans. If all 5 doses are completed, they can also get a set of plates. The vaccination rate in this village jumped from 17% to 38%. Next, let's look at the third factor that traps the poor in poverty: fertility and education. If the poor have fewer children and provide them with good education, those children can find better jobs, earn more money, and escape the poverty trap. Oh. But what's the reality for the poor? First, poorer people tend to want more children. For example, Ethiopia's total fertility rate is about 6.12 children per woman. The core reason for wanting more children is the belief in raising sons for old age support. Since governments don't provide retirement security, they rely on children to support them later in life. Moreover, having children is like an economic investment. They don't know which child will support them in the future, so they have several, hoping at least one will succeed. Because families are poor, parents invest less food and educational resources per child, leading to a common scenario.
If one child among many shows academic promise, parents pin all their hopes on them.
As for other children, if they don't want to study, it's accepted. Child dropout rates in poor areas range from 14% to 50%, mostly voluntary, meaning children themselves quit school. Why children don't want to attend school has multiple causes. First, teacher absenteeism is high in poor areas. Educators often skip classes in Bangladesh, Ecuador, India. Teachers miss about 1 day per week on average. Second, public school teaching quality is poor. When researching poor Indian villages, the team tested over 1,000 children aged 7 to 14 per village. 35% couldn't read basic first grade passages. 70% couldn't solve second grade math, highlighting systemic failures. The education system aims to identify top performers. Teachers ignore struggling students. Simultaneously, poor parents lose motivation to fund education. They think education won't lead to good jobs anyway, so why waste money? Abandoned by both teachers and parents, children naturally disengage from learning. This scenario rarely occurs in average families. Think about it. If your child performed poorly in elementary school, would you just give up? No, you'd wonder if they missed key concepts and help fill the gaps. Or maybe think, oh, perhaps they're late bloomers who'll catch up in middle school. So children in poor areas might miss many opportunities. A child might just lack confidence temporarily, but parents and teachers abandon them too soon. So how do we fix the excessive childbirth problem? What methods can help more children stay in education longer? For excessive childbirth, the best policy might be making people feel fewer children, especially sons, are unnecessary. This requires governments to build social safety nets like health insurance or pensions. For education, the authors suggest changing teaching goals in poor areas. Specifically, first, lower learning difficulty by simplifying curricula so more master basics. For example, basic reading skills and mental math for addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. If children struggle academically, having them repeat a grade may be necessary. Second, the international community can change aid approaches. For instance, just donating books to poor areas may leave children unable to understand them. But recruiting volunteers to tutor children during holidays can effectively boost reading and math skills. The research team actually recruited many volunteers for free reading tutoring. This worked well. Tutored children's reading skills improved rapidly.
Additionally, distance learning can partly compensate for poor local teaching quality, benefiting more children.
This way, most children in poor areas can truly learn during schooling. The authors also advise educating parents, instead of lottery-like bets on one-star child, ensure all children learn basics. Data shows this benefits families more. Each additional year of primary education raises future income by about 8%. Next, let's examine the final factor trapping the poor in poverty. Risks are everywhere for the poor. Many poor rely on odd jobs like masonry or supermarket stocking, unstable work where unemployment can mean months without income. Farming also carries risks. Climate determines harvests, while middlemen control market information on crop price fluctuations, not the farmers. When farmers have bumper harvests, middlemen suppress prices. When harvests fail, they buy less and prices still don't rise. Serious illness is another major risk that can crush families. While neighbors help with weddings or funerals, serious illness exceeds community support, dragging the poor into poverty traps. Why is their risk resistance so weak? The authors identify three key reasons. First, the poor respond poorly when risks hit. For example, a mason loses his job when construction halts. His response? Seeking more work at other sites. But when overall demand drops and projects decrease, more masons compete for fewer jobs. Even if he finds work, wages plummet. Essentially, their risk response increases labor supply, which further depresses wages. Second, the poor avoid insurance due to limited understanding and distrust in its value. Insurers also shun them. Poor clients pose high risks, low premiums, and administrative burdens. Thus, during disasters or severe illness, the poor lack insurance protection. The final reason is physiological. Chronic poverty causes extreme stress, flooding the brain with cortisol, the stress hormone. Cortisol affects brain regions like the prefrontal cortex. This area controls impulse inhibition, so worse living conditions make the poor more impulsive and angry. Based on this analysis, the authors propose two suggestions. First, insurance is vital. Governments should cover part of it, like subsidizing crop insurance for farmers and providing basic health insurance to give the poor a fundamental safety net. Second, stable jobs are crucial for the poor. The authors observe that in Udaipur, the extremely poor area mentioned earlier, there's one remarkably wealthy village. The reason? A factory near the village employs at least one person from every household. For villagers, this isn't just stable income. It gives them a sense of control over their future. It makes life more manageable and motivates them to improve their circumstances. Therefore, governments can make improvements here. By attracting factories or hiring workers, they can provide relatively stable jobs for the poor. All right, that covers the main content of this book. Nobel laureate Amartya Sen believes poverty isn't just lacking money. It robs people of potential and hope, which is its most terrifying aspect. In closing, the authors urge us to listen to the poor, understand their logic. Only then can we truly grasp their lives, uncover poverty's roots, and find solutions. Well, that concludes our interpretation of Poor Economics. Reading notes are below the audio. We'll see you next time.